true Sergeant Carter broke free with terrifying volcanic force. "Hey, Aunt B!" Gomer called out happily. "Oh, you knucklehead!" Carter exploded, sprinting toward the obstacle course, entirely forgetting about the television interview, his stripes, and his new image. "Well, you numbskull, you lame brain, how could you pull such a boneheaded stunt? Of all the knucklehead things to do, what if that had been a live grenade?" Gomer stood up, covered in mud, looking utterly ashamed. "Well, I am sorry, Sergeant Carter. I do not know how in the world I could have done a thing like that." "What? Do?" Carter screamed, his veins bulging on his forehead. "It is because you are stupid. Stupid, stupid, stupid." Ampy rushed forward to the edge of the fence, her face pale with shock. "What is the matter? Why are you shouting like that? Do not tell me you are angry with this poor boy." Again, Carter froze, realizing exactly what he had just done. He turned slowly to face Aunt B, trying desperately to recall his smile. "Oh, no, I am not angry. Not really angry." But Gomer, honest of fault, intervened. "But Aunt B, he has got a right to be angry. I did a very wrong thing." Carter seized a lifeline, forcing a sickly sweet tone back into his voice. "That is right, pal, you did. Naughty. Sorry, Sergeant Carter." Gomer said earnestly, "I really am sorry." "Sorry? You are sorry," Carter managed to say through gritted teeth. "Oh, that is good. That is very good. I am talking to him real nice. Am I not, Mrs. Taylor? Nice and soft and kind." Aunt B crossed her arms. "Well, it is an improvement." "That is an improvement," Carter repeated blankly. "Uh-huh. And this is the kind of sergeant you would like your friend Gomer-Pyle to have." "As a matter of fact, I would," Aunt B said firmly. Carter looked at her. He looked at Gomer. He looked at the dummy grenade. Something inside him snapped. He realized he could not do it. He could not compromise the safety and discipline of the United States Marine Corps just to appease a civilian on a television show. "Uh-huh. Well, I cannot do it," Carter declared loudly, standing up straight, his pride returning. "I am not that kind of sergeant, and I never will be." "Sergeant Carter," Aunt B gasped. Carter pointed a strong finger at Gomer. "And, Pyle, if you think I'm going to drop this, you are nuts. I am going to have you down there digging ditches and doing push-ups until you are blue in the face. You got that?" Aunt B clutched her pearls. "Well, I never—" "Oh, Gomer, you poor dear." Gomer walked over the fence, looking very serious. "Really, Aunt B, there are a few things about Sergeant Carter and the Marines that you ought to know." That evening, the recreation room was completely silent. The television set in the corner was turned up loud. Every Marine in the platoon, along with a pale, trembling Sergeant Carter, sat crowded around the screen, watching the broadcast of the Johnny Clark at Large show. Well, we will have another interesting guest after this word from our sponsor. The television announcer proclaimed happily. Corporal Boyle leaned over to Gomer. "Hey, Pyle, are you sure your Aunt B is going to be on television tonight?" "Well, she said she was," Gomer answered faithfully. "She called me from the hotel right before she left." "Hey, you guys cool it," Carter commanded, his voice shaking slightly. "Well, has she been on yet?" "No, not yet," Gomer replied. He stood up, offering a seat. "Sergeant Carter, if you want to sit down, you can have my chair." "No, thanks," Carter muttered nervously, pacing the floor behind the seated man. "I will stand." On the television, the screen faded back to the bright studio lights. Johnny Clark sat in a comfortable chair, smiling brightly. "Our next guest is a lady I had on the radio program yesterday when we were interviewing out at Camp Henderson," Johnny announced. "She had some very interesting comments about her visits at the camp. I invited her down tonight to tell us a little more about them. How about a nice, warm welcome from Mrs. B. Taylor from Mayberry, North Carolina?" The studio audience applauded as Aunt B, looking lovely and perfectly composed, walked onto the set and sat down opposite the host. "Hi, She smiled graciously. Mrs. Taylor, Mrs. Taylor. Johnny began, settling into his notes. I wrote this back here for you. There you are. In the recreation room, Boyle swallowed hard. Well, here we go, Sergeant. Yeah, Carter groaned, burying his face in his hands. Ma Barker. On the screen, Johnny Clark leaned forward. Now, Mrs. Taylor, when we talk. Carter stood up abruptly in the recreation room, addressing the television as if Johnny Clark could hear him. Look, I want to set the record straight. What I said and did was what I thought was right. And no civilian is going to make me change my mind. Yes, I did. Quiet pile. Carter had a habit, though Gomer had not said a word. You cause enough trouble. Johnny Clark continued on the television. Your complaints centered mainly around his sergeant, Sergeant Carter. That is right. Amby affirmed on the screen. You said he was unfair and unreasonable. You remember telling me that. Johnny asked, probing for controversy. Yes, I remember. Amby nodded gently. Now, would you mind telling our audience your experience with the sergeant? Johnny prompted. Amby folded her hands in her lap, looking thoughtful. Well, when I met Sergeant Carter, the audience, when I met Sergeant Carter, he just impressed me as a terribly ill-tempered man. He was shouting and yelling at my friend and ordering him to do things that were completely unnecessary, acting like a tyrant. In other words, Johnny summarized with dramatic flair. Yes, Amby agreed. When I went back today, the same thing happened again. There he was, shouting and yelling and screaming in a way that I thought was entirely uncalled for. So I got the impression of a totally unreasonable and impossible man. Carter sank into a chair, utterly defeated. His career was over. I see, Johnny said softly on the television. However, Amby said, her voice rising with sudden strength and clarity. Later I did have a talk with Gomer, and he pointed out some things to me that I had not realized before. The men in the recreation room leaned closer to the television. Carter slowly looked up. You see, I was judging things from a civilian point of view. Amby explained gracefully to the millions watching. And then Gomer pointed out that no matter how Sergeant Carter screams or yells, it is only to make him a better Marine. Johnny Clark looked mildly surprised. You mean Gomer does not mind the screaming and yelling? No, heavens no. Amby smiled fondly. He is used to it. He says, whenever Sergeant Carter makes him move sand piles or do push-ups, it is only to help him to remember not to do the same wrong thing twice. Johnny Clark leaned back in his chair, impressed. Well, your Gomer certainly seems to have changed your mind for you. Well, apparently Sergeant Carter has to do what he is doing. Amby concluded with absolute maternal finality. Otherwise, he would end up with a platoon full of knuckleheads. The recreation room erupted in cheers. Boyle slapped Carter on the back. Hey, Sergeant, she made a hero out of you. Carter sat perfectly still, profound relief washing over his hardened features. A genuine, unguarded smile broke across his face. Bless her heart, he whispered softly. I knew she would change her mind once she had a chance to think about it. Civilians have a lot to learn about the military. Yes, sir, Boyle laughed. Thank you, Carter said quietly to the screen. Thank you, sir. The next morning, the administrative office of Company B was bathed in bright, cheerful sunlight. Sergeant Carter sat at his desk, looking refreshed, relaxed, and incredibly happy. Corporal Boyle walked in with a stack of paperwork. Well, a new day, a new world. Huh, Sergeant? To think yesterday you were afraid of losing your stripes. Carter puffed out his chest indignantly. Afraid? I was not afraid. No. Boyle smirked. Terrified, but not afraid, Carter admitted with a rare burst of humor. Suddenly, a knock sounded at the door. Sergeant Carter? Carter looked up to see Gomer standing in the doorway, accompanied by a smiling Aunt Bee, holding her travel bag. Oh, hi, pal, Carter said warmly, standing up from his desk. Hello, Mrs. Taylor. Hello, Sergeant Carter, Amby replied brightly. Aunt Bee is fixing to leave, and she did not want to leave without saying goodbye to you," Gomer explained proudly. Carter walked around his desk.